Alright, so now we're ready to tear down our valve body. Now these Torqueflites have a pretty simple valve body. There's not a whole lot to them. Although it can be a little intimidating. Move the pan out of the way. So we'll start by flipping this over. And we'll remove this bracket, which holds in the torque converter valve and the line pressure valve. Just with a Phillips head. Our screw here, it is under spring pressure. We got one more screw up here holding this. So lift the pressure off gently. And we just want to mentally note how everything goes. So we have this small spring that goes over this tab. Then this big spring that goes over this pocket here. You can see it's got an adjustment. So set that to the side. Then we have our line pressure and torque converter valves. Now on all these valves, we just want to check for any major scoring on any of these journals. Vertical scores this way will leak hydraulic pressure, obviously, so we just want to make sure they're all good to go. This one looks fine. Now we'll remove the screws from the plate stiffener. Let's remove these screws. Now we'll flip over and take out all of these screws. Alright, now the lower section of the valve body should be free. Take the plate with it. Alright, so I got everything cleaned up for the most part. Before we start reassembly, there are some modifications we need to do with the valve body for our shift kit. So we're going to start at the separator plate. You can see there's a couple different routes you can go. If you want like really neck-breaking hard shifts, you can go on there. We're just looking to firm the shifts up a little bit, so we're going to go for the smaller side of firming up the shifts. If you go full bore on all these, then it'll like basically be breaking the tires loose on hard shifts 1 to 2, so not what we're looking for. So we'll start out by drilling our holes here. So we'll orient our separator plate like it is in the picture, and we'll start looking. So hole A is right here. That needs to get drilled to 110 thousandths. Luckily transgo does give us drill bits, so that's what we're going to use. So you get 3 different drill bits in the kit: a 3/16 bit, 110 thousandths bit, and an 86 thousandths bit. So we're going to use the 110 thousandths bit, the medium bit, for hole A on the separator plate, which is right there. You see just a little step up. So there we go, hole A drilled out to 110 thousandths. Next is hole B, or 1-2 shift. It says you can drill it from 86 to 125 thousandths. We're going to go on the low end here. That's our hole right there. Hardly taking much material off at all. Then we have hole C, which is that hole right there. Looks like that's a 2-3 shift. We can go from 86 to 125 thousandths. It already looks quite a bit bigger than that, so we'll be leaving it. Then we've got hole D, which is 110 to 40 thousandths. Looks like it's that hole right there. I'm thinking it's already bigger than that. Yep, so we don't need to touch it. Alright, so next step is another hole on the separator plate. If we're running a higher stall converter, which we are running a 2500 stall converter, then we need to drill this hole out to 3/16. Now, it looks like some transmissions have 2 holes there, in which case you don't drill. We only have 1 hole, so we are going to drill. A little bit of blow through on this plate I'm going to clean up with a file. Alright, so step 3 has us look at this section of the valve body. We have a bypass valve here, which we don't, so we'll skip it. It looks like this hole here, according to right here, we need to leave the check ball out of it because of our high stall converter. And because we do not have that second hole in our separator plate, we're going to leave the check ball out of this hole. So I'm going to mark those with a paint pen just so we remember to leave those out. So no check ball here, and no check ball here. So it looks like that's it for those steps. Next step, we're going to be putting in a new style manual shift valve. So it looks like for the next part of the kit, we actually do need to remove the rooster comb. Forgot about this, but so we do need to pop our E-clip out, just like that. Got a spacer. And that comes apart. So on this bore for the valve, we actually need to file a flat across it, like shown there. So we'll use the side of this file. It's soft metal, so it's not too hard at all. And we'll just file about halfway through it. Alright, that should do it. Now we're going to clean that up really good. So now we'll use this little peg they provided to help hold the detent ball and spring in place. So there we go. So here's our new manual valve. Before we get it installed, we'll get the rooster comb back on, which slots into that valve obviously. We do actually have a new seal for our throttle valve, so we'll pop this old one out. We'll push our new seal in. So now we can put our manual valve in. We'll just loop up all the journals. Drop it down in its bore. Oop, little fiddly. So once we're on that click, alright, so as we put the detent on, we want to make sure the manual valve is slotted with the rooster comb there. There we go. So you got to make sure that the valve stays aligned with the hole. If it gets cocked, it won't go in correctly. So now we can go through our whole range, being careful not to do that. So now we go through our whole range, and you can see how the valve is actuated. We want to get the throttle valve back in with the E-clip, just to keep everything from flying apart. So I'm going to go all the way inboard, which is park. And once we're in park, we need to check right here on the 4th little wall inboard that we're within 30 thousandths of flush. And you can see that we are. If we weren't, then we need to bend this arm, but in our case we're good to go. If we had a lockup trans, we'd do all this stuff, but we don't. And then here, the kit talks about valve bodies with a bypass spring and ball. We don't have that, and if you look here, back on this diagram, there's a hole L in the separator plate. If you have hole L there, then you have to have one of these setups. We don't have that hole. You can see 77 and up, don't drill. Alright, so next, our throttle valve or TV valve, we need to grind this part down. And actually the picture is just about to scale, which is nice. So you can see how much we got to grind off there. To about 9/32 or 281 thousandths. Alright, so there we are, just about the right length. Let that cool down, and then we can put it back in the valve body. Alright, so we're at the point now where we're ready to start normal assembly. There are a couple things that we'll have to do a little bit differently since we're doing the shift kit, but we can start out by just using the normal procedure for the shift valves. So our shift valves, we'll just lube up, reuse the normal spring, they don't need any modification. And we want to check that they move freely. Alright, so now we have our downshift module. Doesn't need any modification. So we'll go ahead and put it in place. Want to make sure this valve here is in place. Then we have this plate that goes on top. Get a couple of our screws started. Then we can run them all the way down. Next we can put in our shuttle valve and governor plugs. So in the shift kit, if you want shift command, which makes it so you can shift down into low at any speed, then there is a modification that needs to be done to the 1-2 governor valve. I don't care, we don't care about that, so we don't need to be able to shift down to low at 100 miles an hour or whatever. So we're going to leave that as is and reassemble normally. Alright, so next up we got our shuttle valve, which if you remember has this E-clip. We'll go ahead and remove that. Goes in through this center hole. Do need to remove that nylon spring seat. There we go. Our first spring seat. Spring. Next seat. And then we'll just pull that down and put our E-clip on. Alright, now we can get our shuttle valve spring and plug in and install the plate. And we can reinstall our cover now. Now I can put all of our check balls back in place. So our biggest 11/32 check ball is going to go in the largest pocket here. There is one check ball you can omit for a really firm shift. We're going to keep it. So we'll be reusing all the 5 stock 1/4 inch check balls. And then we have one more that goes into the transfer plate. So in the transfer plate, our one check ball goes right here. Then we'll take our separator plate, and it's ready to go on. So we can install our shorter screws and stiffener. So now we're ready to put the transfer plate back onto the valve body. It's going to reattach like so. Give some generous lubrication before we put the plate back on. Now we'll take all the long screws and get them all started. So before we go and snug all those screws up, let's get our pressure regulating valve back in there. There are some modifications we have to make. So we're going to discard the stock spring that was there. We're going to take a shim that came with the kit, put it over the valve, and then we have this spring seat. We have this inner spring, and then this outer spring. Lubricate that up. Then it goes into its bore. Then we need to make sure the spring seat has the notch that way so that it sits flat against the valve body. Then we have our springs. Then we also have our converter valve. We reuse the stock spring. And then we'll put our spring adjustment in there for the PR valve. So this is how our retainer is going to sit. You see this screw acts as a stop for the throttle valve. That's a seat for the converter spring. Then obviously we have our adjuster for the pressure valve. Then we got our third screw there. Now we do have an adjustment to make to our PR valve spring adjustment. So we're going to take a 3/16 Allen wrench and turn the adjuster clockwise until the spring seat is flush against the adjuster. Alright, so that's just flush. So that should be good for us. Then on the other side we got our last valve, the line pressure regulator. So we just have this spring, or this valve here rather. And then we have this inner piece in color, and it goes in like that. So there we go. Put our cover back on. Looks like I accidentally missed the valve body filter. So we'll need to undo these screws and take the transfer plate off. So this hole right here is where our filter is supposed to go. We can actually take our transfer plate. We're going to take our separator plate back off, actually. Stupid mistake. So you may remember the old style filter is this cylindrical one. The new style is a cone. That's just because the 46 RE, that series, has a different casting in the valve body, so it requires that style filter. It works fine in these. So now I'll just reassemble like we were. Alright, now we're ready to torque down all of the valve body to transfer plate screws. We want to leave these 3 holes without any screws because that's where the filter bolts in. Alright, so now we're good to put our filter on. Our transgo kit came with this high flow steel mesh filter, so that's what we use. Alright, there we go. Our valve body is fully assembled and ready to go. All of the modifications that need to be done to it are already complete. There are a couple more we got to do in the transmission case, but we'll do that when we put this inside. So let's do it. Alright, so before we put our valve body back in, we're going to do a final functionality check using air. So this port should actuate the low reverse band. It is. This one should be the front. Looks good. Alright, so when we put air to this hole, we should hear the front clutch thump. I hear it. And then that should be the rear clutch. It's a little more subtle, but I can hear it. So, functionality check complete. Let's put our accumulator in. So for our accumulator, we have 2 seal rings to replace. So we'll lube those up. Place it in its bore. And then we'll place our accumulator spring on top of it. Alright, so one last modification we got to do for our shift kit is install an orifice plug into this first hole. This is what it looks like. So we're just going to put it over our punch. This is a 5/16 punch. And tap it into the case. I think we've got to go with a smaller punch. Alright, we'll go size down on our punch just to keep it from collapsing and trapping the punch in the hole. That would be bad. There we go. Alright, now we're ready to put our valve body in with our parking pole locked into its proper position. Lube up our seal. And then we just got to fish our parking rod back down there while we seat our shift select in. There we go. And now we'll start all of our valve body to case bolts. And then we're going to tighten them in a crosswise pattern. Torque spec on these is 100 inch-pounds. Finally, time for our pan. So this is just your standard stock replacement pan, except it's got a nice drain plug in it so you don't have to drop the pan every time you want to change the oil. And these bolts, they don't need to be, reefed on. They just need to be snugged down. In fact, over tightening can cause leaks. It'll pull the pan material down, and then this area doesn't seal properly. That's one thing to check if you're reusing a pan. You want to make sure the rails are completely flat. A lot of times there'll be holes poking out that way that you got to flatten out, and that's caused by over tightening. So just snug, and you want to work your way around. The torque spec is 150 inch-pounds, or a little over 12 foot-pounds. Alrighty, there we go. Pan's on. We're just about finished up. There's a couple little things that we're not going to do yet, such as the speedo gear, because I don't know what rear end gear exactly is going in yet. So I don't have the right speedo gear for that yet, so we'll leave the housing out. The shift lever and throttle valve lever, they need to go back on. They just go on with the clamp. But other than that, we're good to go. Let's throw our torque converter on real quick. So for our converter, we're going with a Hughes 2500 RPM stall. That should do just fine for the setup we got. So we're going to lube up the lip seal and the bushing. I've put about a quart of ATF into the torque converter. So we're good to go ahead and install. There we go. Should slot in a few times. Looks like they put it in the box while the paint was wet. That should be fully slotted in. So there we go. We are ready to make the transmission to the engine and then get it in the car. So, alright, thanks for tagging along. We're good to go. So next time we're going to be mating this up with the engine and hopefully getting it installed in the car. So I will see you guys then.